Hi, I'm Joe Landry, and this is a presentation about St. Mary's Catholic Parish in Franklin, Massachusetts. In this presentation, we'll examine the parish from its inception in 1877 up until the year 1977. Before we begin, let's examine the role that the church played in the formation of Franklin as a town. When the settlers first came to America in the mid-1600s, they brought the congregational religion with them. Since there was no central government in America at that time, the church became the law of the land, thus making the Massachusetts Bay Colony a theocracy. Because of this, weekly attendance at church was mandatory. In the early years of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, many small towns were formed out of the larger town of Dedham. One such town was Wrentham, which is highlighted as shown. Wrentham was formed in 1673, and it was made up of today's Wrentham, Franklin, and Norfolk. In the early 1700s, a small village developed near the Mine Brook in the western part of Wrentham. The detail shows where that village was located, as well as today's Wrentham Center. Since the church was in Wrentham Center, it created a hardship for people in the Mine Brook village to get to church, as the only mode of transportation was by horse and carriage. The trip was made even more difficult in the winter months. As the village became larger, a small group of people petitioned the town of Wrentham to see if they could build a church in the village. They felt that it was unfair that they had to pay taxes to a church that was so far away, and they felt that the taxes should pay for a new church which was closer to where they lived. When their request was denied, they were told that there could only be one church in town. However, by 1738, and after numerous requests, a compromise was reached whereby the western part of Wrentham would be established as a separate precinct, but would still be a part of Wrentham. Once that precinct had been established, it allowed the inhabitants to build a new church. When it came time to find a suitable location for the church, they chose the geographical center of the precinct to make it fair to everyone. And so, in 1738, the Congregational Church of the Western Precinct of Wrentham was established. At that time, a new meeting house was constructed near today's town common. This is a drawing of that meeting house, which is what churches were called back then. On July 4th, 1776, the 13 colonies declared their independence from Britain, thereby giving the people in the western precinct of Wrentham their first taste of freedom. From the time that the precinct was formed, the inhabitants had tried unsuccessfully to get the precinct established as a separate town. After numerous requests were made, the town of Wrentham finally gave its approval, and in March of 1778, the western precinct of Wrentham became the town of Franklin. Now that the town of Franklin had been established, the Congregational Society decided to build a new church as seen in the picture. It stood to within a few rods of the center of town and faced Pleasant Street. In 1840, the church was moved northward to where today's St. Mary's Church stands. While it was being moved, it was turned 90 degrees so that it faced the town common. The Catholics come to Franklin. Up until the mid-1800s, there were no Catholics in Franklin. But in 1849, a small group of Italian immigrants came to Franklin, many of them having built the railroad that passed through town. Because they were mostly Catholic, they wanted to be able to practice their religion by going to Mass. That same year, the first Catholic Mass was celebrated in the town of Franklin by Father Charles O'Reilly in the home of John L. Fitzpatrick on Medway Road, which is today's Lincoln Street. There were 5 persons present for that Mass. Today, the home that was once owned by John L. Fitzpatrick is a private residence at 316 Lincoln Street. John L. Fitzpatrick was the owner of a marble and granite yard that was on the corner of Oak Street and Beaver Street, roughly where today's Daniel McCahill Street is located. The Archdiocese of Boston would eventually purchase this property and would build a parochial school there. This is the Franklin Town Hall that was constructed in the mid-1800s. It is located on West Central Street next to the Methodist Church. In 1851, the Reverend M. X. Carroll of Foxborough offered masses on a monthly basis at the town hall. In 1862, the Reverend Michael McCabe of Woonsocket replaced Reverend Carroll, and the Reverend Philip Gillick of North Attleboro replaced him after that. The first corporate action of the Catholics in Franklin was the purchase of St. Mary's Cemetery. Prior to 1865, those Catholics who died in Franklin were buried in Woonsocket or Blackstone. The land for the new cemetery was purchased in 1864 from Hugh McParland. It was paid for by several families who bought the first set of lots, which are located on the main driveway from the street to the Coughlin lot. Mary Tobin, a girl of 19 years, died on July 29, 1865, and was the first person to be buried in St. Mary's Cemetery. Her headstone stood until it was taken down in the 1940s, and at that time her name was added to the Duggan stone. A mission station is formed. In 1871, the Congregational Society turned their old church over to the Catholics after they had moved into their new church near High Street. The church, which was constructed in the 1780s, was deeded through John L. Fitzpatrick to the Right Reverend John J. Williams, the Archbishop of Boston. In 1872, the Reverend Francis Guess, who was the pastor of Blessed Sacrament Church in Walpole, assumed charge of the Franklin Church as a mission station and said Mass in Franklin every 2 or 3 weeks. When he was in Franklin, Father Guess would stay at the home of John Farrell, which is located at 37 Beaver Street today. The conditions back then were so primitive, Mrs. Farrell would bake the altar breads between 2 flat irons. After a while, she would use a special pair of tongs that had polished discs on the points, and she would make the altar breads that way. St. Mary's Parish is formed. On February 6, 1877, St. Mary's Parish was formed, with the Reverend James Griffin being named the first pastor of the newly formed St. Mary's Parish. Father Griffin had just completed building St. Francis de Sales Church in Roxbury at the time of his appointment. In 1885, Father Griffin died, and the Reverend John M. Mulcahy succeeded him as pastor. In 1888, the former Congregational Church was dedicated by Archbishop John J. Williams as St. Mary's Church. This is a picture of the interior of that church as it appeared in the 1890s. In 1891, Father Mulcahy was transferred to St. Agnes Church in Arlington, and the Reverend Martin J. Lee assumed the pastorate of St. Mary's Parish. St. Mary's Parochial School. In 1893, Father Lee established St. Mary's Parochial School and purchased the Fitzpatrick Marble Yard and the family residence beyond it on Oak Street. The house was renovated and furnished very simply as a convent, with 2 classrooms on the first floor. 2 more classrooms were made in the basement of the old church. The school opened in September of 1893 with 4 Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul in charge. In 1899, school enrollment had increased to the point where a school building was needed. This picture shows the new parochial school that was constructed at the corner of Beaver Street and Oak Street, where today's Daniel McCahill Street is located. Before the school building was completed, St. Mary's Church had become unsafe to use, as it had been in constant use since the late 1700s. As a result, the parish was forced to hold weekly masses downtown in the Morse Opera House until a makeshift chapel could be constructed in the basement of the new parochial school building. In addition, 2 classrooms were finished to take the place of those that were in the church basement. Then, on June 26, 1900, disaster would strike when the old St. Mary's Church was destroyed by fire. As a result of the loss of their church, the Catholics continued to use the basement of the parochial school as a makeshift chapel until the ground floor of the building could be converted into a chapel. Because the fire was only partially covered by insurance, the parish went into debt. The parochial school struggled for 2 more years and closed in 1902. In 1903, the ground floor of the parochial school building was converted into a chapel as seen in this picture. On November 13, 1904, Bishop John Brady dedicated the chapel. Once that was done, the basement was turned into a gymnasium. In 1903, Father Lee was transferred to another parish, and the Reverend Daniel P. Scannell became the new pastor. The Knights of Columbus. In the fall of 1915, 50 Catholic gentlemen petitioned the Supreme Council of the Knights of Columbus so that they could organize and maintain a Council of the Knights of Columbus in Franklin. On June 18, 1916, the charter was granted, and the Sacred Heart Council number 1847 was formed. Daniel P. Prendergast was the first Grand Knight of the Council, with Father Daniel P. Scannell being designated as the Council's chaplain. The induction ceremony was held in the Morse Opera House in downtown Franklin. Subsequent ceremonies were held in the Central Square Hall. In later years, the Council moved to the 3rd floor of the Faber Block on Main Street until 1966, when they moved into their new quarters on West Central Street. That building served the Knights of Columbus for many years until the property was sold. Today, the Council meets in the lower church hall that bears its name. In 1921, the Catholic Women's Club was organized with Miss Anna T. Kelly as president. In the early 1920s, Father Scannell started making plans for a new church edifice. The original plans called for a church with no basement. However, before construction could begin on the new church, disaster would strike once again. On May 30, 1923, the old parochial school that had been used as a church was destroyed by fire. The Morse Opera House would once again be used for Mass until the new church would be ready for use. On September 2, 1923, the cornerstone of the new church was blessed by Cardinal William O'Connell, with the first Mass being said on March 5, 1924, in the basement of the church. By the end of the summer of 1924, the shell of the whole church was completed, with the windows installed and the basement chapel being completed. In 1924, the Reverend Edward Kenney became the pastor of St. Mary's Parish. During the first few years of Father Kenney's pastorate, the interior of the upper church was completed. On September 18, 1927, the first solemn high mass was sung in the upper church, celebrating the parish's Golden Jubilee. Up until 1927, St. Mary's Parish extended all the way to the Massachusetts-Rhode Island state line border. This meant that, according to church law, the people of South Bellingham belonged to St. Mary's Parish in Franklin. Because they were so far away, they looked to the priests of Woonsocket for their ministrations. To relieve this situation, Father Kenney recommended to Cardinal O'Connell that South Bellingham be cut from St. Mary's Parish and that a new parish be formed. This new parish was named Assumption Parish. A new rectory for St. Mary's Parish. The white building that is seen in the picture is the rectory that was constructed in 1878 when the parish was first formed. On April 14, 1932, Father Kenney announced his decision to build a new rectory as it was in bad repair. The old rectory was moved to the rear of the property, and the priests continued to live in it while a new one was being constructed. Once the new rectory was completed, the old one was torn down. This is a rear view of the old rectory. In April of 1932, the building was damaged by a fire, and it is likely that this was the main reason that Father Kenney decided to replace it with a new rectory. Here is a recent picture of the new rectory, which is made of brick and limestone. New front steps for St. Mary's Church. In 1939, Father Kenney made improvements to the church building. The temporary concrete steps in the front of the church were replaced with granite steps, and iron guardrails were added. In addition, Father Kenney had a beautifully designed baptismal font installed in the sacristy, which was a gift from him to the parish. The Home of the Holy Child. In 1944, the Bernardine Sisters opened the Home of the Holy Child in the old Hayward Mansion for children who are from broken homes. In 1944, a group of Cistercian nuns of the strict observance came from Ireland to lead a strictly cloistered life of prayer in Mount St. Mary's Abbey on the edge of town, in Wrentham. In 1947, another portion of St. Mary's Parish territory was lost when St. Jude's Parish was established in Norfolk by Archbishop Richard Cushing. In September of 1948, Pope Pius XII conferred on Father Kenney the rank of Domestic Prelate and Assistant at the Papal Throne. However, the August heat had taken its toll on Father Kenney's declining health, and he was unable to continue saying Mass. In January of 1949, Father James J. McManus was appointed administrator until a new pastor was selected, while Father Kenney retired to St. Margaret's Hospital for bed rest. Father McManus endeared himself to all during his short stay in Franklin. In 1950, the Reverend George M. Dowd was appointed the pastor of St. Mary's Parish. He learned of his appointment while in Rome, while he was leading a Holy Year pilgrimage of Boy Scouts in Europe. In a private audience with Pope Pius XII, Father Dowd asked the Holy Father for permission to give his new parishioners the special apostolic blessing, which the Holy Father gladly gave him. as well as his own personal greetings to the people of Franklin. In September of 1951, the parishioners were shocked and saddened to learn of Father Kenney's untimely death. St. Mary's Parochial School. In January of 1955, the parish made the decision to construct a new parochial school on the corner of Main Street and Pleasant Street. A large fundraising drive was created to pay for the school. This is a picture of a typical budget envelope that parishioners would use for their pledge contributions. On December 8, 1955, a groundbreaking ceremony was held at the site of the new school on the old Haywood property. In September of 1956, St. Mary's Parochial School opened its doors, with Sister Mary Gabriella being assigned as the first principal. She also taught the second grade. At the time that the school was first opened, the only grades at St. Mary's School were the first and the second grade. At the end of each school year, a new grade would be added to the school, and new books and desks would be purchased at that time. This process would continue until the oldest class reached the 8th grade. In August of 1959, a fundraising campaign opened to solicit contributions for the expansion of St. Mary's School and for debt reduction. The expanded school would essentially double in size with the addition of 6 new classrooms and an auditorium in the basement of the building. In 1960, Monsignor Dowd died, and the Reverend William E. Collins was appointed the pastor of St. Mary's Parish. In 1963, the 8th grade class of St. Mary's School graduated, thus becoming the first class to graduate from the school. In 1972, St. Mary's School closed its doors. In 1995, the Benjamin Franklin Classical Charter School was granted a license to use the building for the 1995-1996 school year. They continued to use the building until they constructed a new building of their own in the early 2000s. In May of 1971, Monsignor Collins retired and was replaced by Reverend Albert G. Fairbanks as pastor. In 1977, St. Mary's Parish celebrated their 100th anniversary as a parish and continues to this day as a vibrant parish that exists to honor and glorify God. And this concludes our presentation. Thanks for watching.